Okay, so I'm going to make some challah bread because it's become a little bit of a tradition for me at Easter. I really enjoy having challah bread around, and the kids like to make it into French toast with whatever we have left after the Easter services. So this year Easter is going to include communion for the church online, but not the Easter Vigil. The Easter Vigil is not going to have communion just because I find it is complicated to do it that many times. So we're just doing it on Sundays right now, which makes Holy Week a little odd to me, to not have it at Maundy Thursday and to not have it for the Easter Vigil. But I think that that's okay. That's just how Holy Week is going to be this year. So I use the same recipe for challah bread as I use every year, and I will put the recipe online. So I start with some yeast. I use the Rapid Rise high active yeast, and we make enough bread that we buy it in the little jar. And then I'll weigh out 1/4 ounce of that, a cup of warm water to let the yeast activate in, and then 1/2 cup of oil, 1/3 cup of sugar, some salt, some eggs, and 6 cups of flour. And the flour that I usually use is just a King Arthur's all-purpose unbleached flour, and I use that because Cook's Illustrated says that it's the best for making bread. It has 11.7% protein, and the King Arthur bread flour has 12.7% protein. So I don't know enough about this. I just do what the experts tell me is the best, and I've had really good results with the King Arthur all-purpose flour. I have the bread flour on hand, and so if I run out of this, I'll mix in a little bit of that. But that's what I'm going to start with. So I'm going to gather the rest of my ingredients in a bowl, and I will meet you right back here to combine everything and do some kneading. So I've gotten together a couple of bowls. I don't usually like to use a metal bowl because it holds temperatures, and temperature can be finicky with yeast, but I think it's okay because it is warm out, unlike most Holy Weeks. I've got eggs. These are McKee eggs. I got these eggs from George and Susan McKee, and so I'm going to use those. And then I have a cup of warm water. And by warm, it's generally just a little bit warmer than lukewarm. You want it to be between 110 and 115 degrees. You want it to be warm enough to activate the yeast, but you don't want it to kill the yeast. And I actually do take the temperature of it because this is the thing that I almost always mess up on. I wind up with my yeast getting into water that's too warm, and then it kills the yeast, and then you don't get a rise. So this is almost exactly 110 degrees, so I'm going to put it right in here into this bowl, and then I'm going to weigh my yeast on a kitchen scale. You might have noticed that I moved the angle of my camera. It's because I wanted you to see the clean half of my kitchen, not the dirty half. So I moved it over here where you can't see the mess that is the sink because the kids have not done the dishes like they were supposed to. So I need, what does my recipe say? How much yeast? 1/4 ounce of yeast. So I've got that here to measure, and it doesn't take a lot. Let's see, that's 0.2. I've got grams, kilograms, and pounds and ounces, so I'm going to err a little bit to the side of too much. So that's going to be a little too much. So that's about right on the yeast. And I'm going to take that and put that here into the water and let that dissolve. Won't take very long for it to dissolve. And then once I've got that, I'm going to take my oil and my sugar and my salt, and I'm going to put those in with 4 of the eggs and 4 cups of flour. So the oil is half a cup of oil. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that out. It's just vegetable oil or canola oil. You don't want to use olive oil because that will burn and give a harsh taste to your bread. And then 1/3 cup of sugar. One of the things I love about my new kitchen is that I have a drawer where all of the measuring cups can go in one place. It makes me oh so happy to have that. And of course, still, in spite of that, I still can't find 1/3 cup. There one is. 1/3 cup of sugar. A cup of sugar and a teaspoon of salt. So my salt currently is in the form of Mediterranean sea salt that has to be ground. So I'm going to do that off camera, give you a break, and I will meet you back here in a few moments to put all the ingredients in the bowl. So I've got my yeast dissolved. That's what it looks like right now. And I'm going to add the rest of my ingredients in there. So I'm going to start with the oil, half a cup of oil. That's going in. And then this says to add the sugar and the salt next, but I like to add the flour next. And the reason I do that is because, again, I go to the experts. Paul Hollywood on the Great British Baking Show recommends not putting your salt and your sugar right next to each other because salt can deactivate your yeast. So I don't want to put the salt right in where the yeast is. So I put the salt in after I put the flour in so that it doesn't get right up into the yeast and deactivate it. So, and then I scoop out, there's 2, 3, and I always level this. This is what my mom and my dad taught me to do when I was baking. So I always use this. You guys probably do that already. And so I've got 4 cups of flour, not quite, a little bit more there. 4 cups of flour. It doesn't have to be 100% exact actually, because we're going to add more until it gets to the consistency that we want it to be. So, and then got a teaspoon of salt. Holden is poking his head in to say hi, but not to help. Go figure. And 1/3 cup of sugar. And then, in addition to those things, that out the way, I've got my sugar taken care of. And I don't need my oil anymore, so that's going to go over here, out of the way. And now I'm just down to flour and eggs. And I'm going to start with 4 eggs. The 5th egg is actually not for right now. The 5th egg is for later when we put a glaze, an egg wash on the outside when we bake it. So I'm picking the biggest of these eggs because I usually use a large store-bought egg, and so I don't know, these are a little smaller than what I usually use. So I'm going with whatever I can find that's the biggest out of all of these. Just sort of, I don't think I want to use like this adorable little egg right here. That's just too tiny. It's just adorable though. Can you guys see it? So cute. Okay, so there's my eggs. they're in. I'm going to add those into the mixture, and then it's time to stir. And I'm just going to stir this until it is smooth. I'm just going to use a regular spatula to stir it. And stirring to make it smooth, and then I'm going to add enough flour into the mixture. So I've got, the recipe says 6 cups. I've got 4 cups in here. And depending, it really is weird. It depends on the weather, it depends on the humidity, depends on, I don't know, my mood. It depends on what it looks like. Maybe it depends on the flour and the kind of eggs, and maybe the size of the eggs that I've used. I'm not really sure what it all depends on, but it depends on stuff. And once I get it all in here, I am going to have to add more flour until it's the right consistency to be able to start kneading it. So I'm going to do that. I'll show you what it looks like right now. Here's what it looks like in there right now. Kind of a gloppy mess. I'm going to add a little more flour, and I'm going to stir it for a little while until I get it to the right consistency. And okay, so I'm now ready to turn out the dough. It is still very sticky. It's not absorbed. I think I put about another cup or so of flour in there, and it's not enough yet because the dough is still really sticky. So you see I've prepared a space on my counter with some flour, and I'm just taking this dough and plopping it on there, making sure I'm getting all of the stuff out of the bottom. And I'm just gonna start working it with my hands. At this point I find it easier. There's not much point anymore in putting anything in and stirring it. So this flour just kind of begins to get absorbed into the dough. You can see I'm just sort of picking it up and mushing it. Picking it up and mushing it. And that's how I'm going to work my dough. So as I work on my dough, I thought I could tell you a little bit about why I make challah every year. It's a weird thing, I guess, but because this is the one time of year that our Jewish brothers and sisters are not making challah because it is Passover. Sorry, I had to go get some more flour. And of course in Passover they do not use leavened bread. They use only unleavened bread. And of course then we, most of the year, don't use leavened bread. We use unleavened bread. That's just the tradition in our congregation. But there are certain historical reasons for leavened versus unleavened bread. If you look back in the history of the church, you'll find that for instance, there was a split between the Eastern and Western churches on the use of leavened and unleavened bread. And Eastern Orthodox churches always use leavened bread. That is, just in case you don't know what that means, that is to say that they use bread that has yeast in it and has risen. And the other churches, like in particularly the Roman Church, tends not to use leavened bread, that is bread that has not risen. So if you think about what we say on Easter, that might give you a hint as to why and where the focus is for those different churches. So the Eastern Church insists that the bread must be risen because the bread is the body of Christ and is therefore risen because the body of Christ is risen. The Roman Church says, no, this is the supper that happened before he died on the cross, and therefore it was the Passover meal, and the way that they understand, they are reenacting somewhat. I don't know their theology entirely, and so they only use unleavened bread because it is the meal that Christ celebrated before he died, the Passover meal, which would have been an unleavened bread. Protestant churches sort of use whatever they want. My father's church in Alexandria always has people sign up to bring a loaf of bread every week. And so every week you get something different. Some weeks it's pita bread, and some weeks it's sourdough, and some weeks it's Irish soda bread. He always made an anadama bread that he just loved. I never was a huge fan, but he loved it. And so the challah bread in itself is used in a lot of Jewish traditions as their Sabbath bread. And I didn't know this. I had to look this up just because I wanted to have something to talk about while I was kneading. And I learned that the name comes from the mitzvah, that is the law, the rule, that said that when you were baking, you had to take a portion of your dough to give to the rabbi. And doing that was called separating challah, which I don't know the Hebrew, what it means exactly, but so that was the thing. And so you separated out the portion that you were going to give to the rabbi, and the rest of it would go to you, and that was the challah, the part that you kept. And challah is usually spelled Challah, and it's got a little bit of a at the back of your throat when you say it, so it's a challah bread, like Hanukkah. And they, it tends to be the Sabbath bread, and so, you know, you're not to work on the Sabbath, so on Friday you would make a loaf of bread. You would make 2 loaves. You'd make one for each day, right? You want to have one for Friday night and then one for Saturday, because you're not going to work on Saturday at all. And so you're going to have a second loaf. And one of the things I saw said that there was a tradition of making 2 loaves and braiding each with 6 braids for a total of 12 braids to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. So maybe that's the thing. I don't know. But maybe you can see now, I'm going to show you a little more up close. You can see that the bread, the dough is starting to get much more smooth and even in its texture and a little bit springy, and it is not very sticky. And once it gets to where it doesn't stick to the counter anymore, that's when I'm going to say that the kneading is done. And it's almost there. Still maybe just a little sticky. A little is fine, as long as I don't see it sticking to the counter. I have to tell you how excited I am to be using the counter in my new house, because this counter is so nice for kneading on. It's a nice, I guess, granite counter. Pretty, first of all, with green and white and brown and dark colored specks. And it's so smooth for kneading on, and it doesn't move. I've always kneaded on my kitchen table before, and it's always been a process of chasing it across the kitchen and then back, and the top of it is wood, which is just not as nice for kneading on. So if you watch a baking show, it's always going to tell you that you should do a window pane test. Oh, see, it's sticking now. Just a little bit more flour to make that go away. Scrape that up. Get that, roll it back over here onto the flour. I honestly have never really understood the window pane test. It kind of, you see them do it and they seem to know what they're talking about. but it doesn't ever make sense to me. So anyway, they say that when your dough passes this window pane test, that's when you know that you're done kneading, that you kneaded it enough. And again, just going with what the experts say, the purpose of kneading is to get all of the proteins in your dough activated so that they form the gluten that holds the bread together. And I guess when it's kneaded the proper amount, then you get the very nice structure that you want in your dough. So, so you can see when I pull on it, it just kind of breaks away. The window pane test is when you can do that, I think, and you can get it to stretch and not break. So I think I'm not there yet. I think I still need a little more flour. Probably ought to take a class or something where I can do this with somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, and then I can understand all of the ins and outs of this, why it does what it does, and whatever, but I don't know. I just like doing it the way I do it. It seems to be working so far, so. It's a nice workout for your arms. Fortunately, my arms are nice and strong from hobbling around on crutches for a couple months, so that's a good thing. And it's a nice warm day, so that means that the dough will have a nice warm space to rise in, which is also nice. So let's see. We're getting there. I'm going to do just a little bit more, tiny pinch more flour, tiny pinch more kneading. And then I'm going to put this into a bowl. I'm going to have a little bit of oil in the bowl, just a tiny little bit of oil on the bottom of the bowl to keep the dough from sticking to the bowl. And then I'm going to flip it over so that that oil gets on both sides of the roll of dough. And I'm going to cover it with a tea towel, and I'm going to put it in my kitchen. Now, some ovens have a proofing setting, which is nice. Mine does, and so I might put it in the oven. But on a day like this, as warm as it is and humid, and it's not really that humid, I guess, but it's plenty warm in my house, it probably would do just as well to rise right on top of the stove. The longer you take to rise your bread, the more flavor you get, the longer your yeast can operate and do its thing. The more flavor you get, and then the nicer your final product tastes. That's where you get the taste of it, is from the rising process. So some recipes will even suggest a cold rise in your refrigerator overnight, and letting your yeast really have lots of time to operate and grow. So this thing is just about done. Now look how smooth that is. Look how pretty. You can see that it's, when I smack it, it makes a nice noise. I can pinch it and it pops right back. And here's that window pane test. You can see it's really stretching a lot farther now without breaking. So I think it's just about there. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to put it in a big bowl, and it needs to be a big bowl because you want to have plenty of room for this to at least double in size. So it's going to go from here to about there. It's going to be coming up to the top of the bowl, hopefully, and then that will be the first rise. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. While I leave this to rise, I'm going to go edit all of the video and sound for the Maundy Thursday service and the Good Friday service. And I'm going to come back when this is good and risen. It'll be minimum an hour. I'm probably going to give it an hour and a half because I find that letting it rise a good long time, over an hour, tends to make it so that it is easier to work after, because we're going to have to roll this out, make it into long strands and braid it. So we want it to be pliable and not to bounce backy. Is that a word? No, it's not. I just made it up. So I'm going to do that. So this is what it looks like in the bowl. You can see I'm going to take this towel, which is actually an old baby blanket from when Grace was born, and put it over top. And there, it's going to sit there on my stovetop for a good hour, hour and a half. So it's 2:30 now. I'll be back around 4 o'clock. Okay, so I am going to look and see how my dough looks. And there it is, and it has risen really nicely. And there's Eleanor. Eleanor's working on her own baking project right now. So I'm going to bring this over here to set down, and I'm going to punch down the dough, which is one of my favorite parts. Woof. Watch it deflate. Isn't that fun? Squish, squish, squish. And then I'm going to turn it out on this nice floured surface I have here. So I'm going to onto
This will be satisfying.
there.
I want
So punch it down, turn it out, and then I'm going to use my dough cutter, which is, where did I have it? The dough cutter.
What's with the noise with that now?
And I'm going to cut it into, so it depends on how many loaves I want to make. The recipe I use says to make 2 loaves out of this, and those tend to be big loaves. So I sometimes like to make 4 smaller loaves, especially when I'm going to use it on the altar at Easter, because it is nicer to have a smaller loaf that is easier to manipulate. But I think right now I'm going to make 2 big loaves because I'm going to just be using it here at home. I'm going to use one of them on the altar for Easter.
One of them at dinner tonight.
And one of them at dinner tonight, perhaps. Or for breakfast, maybe, to have.
Maybe we could have half tonight and half at breakfast.
Maybe we can make French toast out of it.
Yes.
That's one of our favorite things to do. So to make sure I'm working on making it even, I like to put it on the scale and see how much my dough weighs. So it's about 3 pounds. So I'm gonna cut it roughly in half and see if I'm about 1.5 pounds. I am just about 1.5 pounds there. And then this one I'm gonna weigh, and it is a little over 1.5 pounds. And so I'm going to then cut each of those into 3 pieces. And make little round pieces, and then I'm going to let it rest. So if this is 1.5 pounds, I want each of these pieces to be 1/2 pound. So let's see where we're at there. 1/2 pound. This comes with a little bit of practice and figuring out the weight. Yep, that's a little bigger than 1/2 pound, and that one's just a tiny bit smaller than 1/2 pound. So I'm going to do the same thing with this one. And then I'm going to let the dough rest for just a few minutes. So let's see how we are on the weights there. A little under 1/2 pound. Same. So those are all just about 1/2 pound. So I'm going to leave them in kind of long pieces like that because I'm going to roll them out. If I was going to try and make round pieces, I would try and kind of round them a little bit before I rest them. But I'm just going to sit those right there and let them rest for just about 5 or 10 minutes. So I'll be back when that's done. So I let this rest for just a few minutes. And
It might be a bit too big, Mom.
it did take about 1.5 hours to rise, by the way. That was 1.5 hours that I left it. And it was nicely risen. I was very pleased with that. So while I was letting this rest, I went ahead and put some parchment paper on a big cookie sheet, and
Oh, that's way too much.
I'm going to use that.
Sorry.
I'm going to make the ropes. Each of these ropes is going to be over a foot long, about 15 to 17 inches, somewhere in there. And I just kind of roll it out like Play-Doh. Just, and because it's nicely rested, it just rolls out nice and long, and it doesn't bounce back too much. So really the length of the can is about the length I want it to be, because I'm going to braid it, and when I braid each one, that's going to make it a little small. It's going to, if I start with braiding pieces, 3 pieces this long, and then I braid them, it's going to get shorter. So I kind of make it about the length of the pan, and I just set it on there and go to the next one. I kind of do a combination of rolling and squishing and whatever, smooshing and I don't know, all of that, and just get it to be nice and long to where I want it. Like that. There. And then the last piece, do the same thing with that.
Mom.
That looks perfect, Eleanor. Eleanor is making some brownie / cookie.
Your cookie brownies.
Yeah. There you go. Show those off, and then you can put those in the oven. The oven just got to being preheated, so you can just put it right in. You don't need a mitt to put it in as long as you don't touch anything.
Yeah, that's what I'm scared.
Okay. Well then, can you wait until I finish this bit right here? There's a mitt in that drawer to the left of the stove.
That one?
Yes. There you go.
That one barely opens though, Mom.
I know. Alright, so now I've got those 3.
Should I hold the cloth as well, Mom?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So, you can just fold this, pinch the ends together, kind of fold them under a little bit so that they
Mom,
stay. Just a second, honey.
how long should I have
You
it
have
in
a
there?
recipe, you should look and see. There you go. So those are pinched together, and then I'm just going to braid it. Left over right, right over left, left over right, right over left. Just like that, and then pinch the ends together again.
34 to 39 minutes.
And I just fold the ends under to make it tidy. Just a second.
It's half of 56.
Half of 56?
36.
Half of 36 is 18.
18.
So there's one
What
of
if I
them.
put it in 18?
And then I'm going to do the other one exactly the same, and I will come back and show you. So here's what they look like together, and I'm finished with both of them. I've braided them, and I'm going to leave them to rise a second time for another hour or so until they've doubled in size again. And you can see this one
We'll have to wait.
is a little tidier than this one. This one's probably going to be a little bigger at one end than the other. If I did this more often, I'd probably be a little better at all of this. But anyway, and there's Eleanor eating the leftover cookie dough and sharing it with her sister and her mother, because that is a fabulous cook thing to do. So I'm going to leave these. Okay, so my bread has risen its second time, and it looks beautiful. Here is what it looks like. And Holden is doing the dishes in the background, so hooray for that. I took 1 egg and a little bit of cold water, and I mixed them in a little tiny bowl, and now I'm going to brush that all over the outside of the challah, and that's going to give it a nice glaze. I'm going to try and keep it from dripping too much onto the parchment, because anywhere that it drips, it's going to make it stick, but it's going to drip. It's just how life goes. And if you like, you can add some sesame seeds to the top. You could add some poppy seeds. You could put some other flavoring on it if you want. People have been known to add things into the dough, like currants and chocolate and hazelnut. What do you want to put on it, Roland?
Maybe a bit of oregano or basil.
I don't know how that would work. We could put a little oregano or Italian seasoning on one of them. I want to keep one of them plain for using on the altar. But we could do a little bit of oregano on one. What do you think?
Perfect. Herbs go well with bread, so.
Yeah, like Italian seasoning. What do you think of that? You want to grab the Italian seasoning out of the pantry?
An extra oregano.
We'll do a little.
Where is this going?
That goes down there. Don't the. There you go. Yeah, not quite how I would do that. Go figure. You want to get the Italian seasoning out of the pantry for me?
Sure.
Thanks.
If you're gonna season it, make sure not to over season it.
Right, we don't
If you
want
over season it, you won't be able to taste the egg or
or anything but the seasoning.
yeah. Seasoning's good in a moderate amount.
So yeah, let's try that. This is just be an experiment, won't it?
Yep.
So the oven is preheated to 350, and we're gonna put that put this in there and set a timer. I'm just gonna sprinkle a little bit of this on here. See how it goes. It's kind of nice. All right, here it goes into the oven. And we'll take it out and turn the pan in halfway through the baking time. And the baking time, I don't remember. I'm going to have to look at my recipe to make sure of what the baking time is. I want to say it's about 30 minutes. That's what I sort of remember. So we'll bake it for half that time and then turn the pan and then do the other half, and I'll come back when it's done. My bread is done. I took it out of the oven, and to check that it's done, I take it and I flip it over and I tap on the bottom. Don't know if you can really hear it, but it has a hollow sound, a nice hollow sound when I tap, and it looks lovely. It is not quite as puffy this way as I might like. I might have overproofed it a little bit. I don't know, but I think it's going to taste fabulous and it looks really nice. So that is it for this little video, and you'll see this again on the table at Easter. Bye.